My thing when I'm in schools, my mantra with kids is practice makes better, not perfect. Because, perfect is something we're never going to achieve. So why have your goal be something that you can never achieve? To me, as long as something is a little better than it was before, that is success.
Welcome to the Origins of Creativity podcast, brought to you by Bookling Media, where we discover the magic behind creativity through the stories of passionate creators. Listen in and fill your creative vessel with delightful insights and uplifting tales.
Hello, you are listening to the Origins of Creativity podcast. I am your host, Becky Gehrisch. Thanks for joining us. In our conversation today, we'll be talking about the importance of curiosity and creativity and the creative process behind our guest's latest picture book. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app. This way you won't miss the next episode and it helps others find us.
My guest today is an award-winning children's book author and illustrator. He illustrated his first children's book for Houghton Mifflin Company in 1989 and has since illustrated over 30 others, including his 2019 Caldecott Honor-winning picture book, The Rough Patch, and his New York Times best-selling Bat series, Bats at the Beach, Bats at the Library, Bats at the Ballgame, and Bats in the Band. Brian's work has garnered many publishing awards and can be found in galleries around the country. He enjoys visiting elementary schools around the U.S. talking about writing and illustration. Thank you for joining me today on the show, Brian Lees.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I am super excited to hear all about your writing and illustration work, as I've been a fan for quite a while. Would you like to share with us any kind of fun facts about yourself, just to kind of get us into, who you are and what's inspired you?
I guess I would say I consider myself incredibly lucky to be a published author and illustrator because it's what I wanted to do when I was a little kid. But I also suffer greatly from fraud complex. And as a kid, knew that was not what was going to happen for me. So, I sit here with deep gratitude every day that I'm allowed to keep writing and illustrating.
So tell me about when you were a kid. That's kind of interesting. What was it that made you feel like that kind of fraud, imposter syndrome?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is that a lot of what we know as kids, as possibilities for us, come through the world around us, our parents, friends, and things like that. My mom was a high school English teacher in Princeton, New Jersey. My dad was an organic chemist. So had an interesting mix of literature and science growing up. And their friends were all sort of teachers and scientists. So I had never really met an author or an illustrator until one came to my school when I was in fifth grade. But I had always wanted to do something creative. And I always believed that, published authors and illustrators were magical beings who lived in a colony somewhere and sent these incredible things down for us normal people to share. And so it always seemed like a very magical thing and a very specialized thing, not just something that you could sit down and start to work on. So, because I didn't feel special at all in any way, I didn't think it was for me.
Oh, that's interesting. So did the scientific or teacher influence in your life, did that have an effect on your work? I'm just wondering how, did that come about with more of a scientific approach or any influence like that?
Well, I think both of them influenced me. I mean, I've always been fascinated with the way that things work. So in my illustrations, if I'm going to show a barn door, I'm going to make sure that the mechanics of the barn door are right. Because I was also one of those picky little kids who would look and say, that hinge is going the wrong way. And, so I think, the science part of it, accuracy certainly came into it. And then from my mother's side, the love of words.
Mm.
Just the sound of words, chewy words, hard, crispy words. And that's something I try to talk about in school visits with kids is that, words are toys. They're things for you to play with. It's not just, some dim utterance. But if you really focus on your words, they're incredibly rich. And so to me, a love of words, not just for what they say, but how they sound, is very important in trying to write or illustrate a story.
That is so interesting, because when we take it, like you said, a magical thing, and we take the words or we take the art and make it into something really special, it does feel magical. It does feel special. And I've noticed that with, your illustrations and, the detail. And that's why I was wondering if the influence of that, how you bring in the detail and the accuracy, that is very interesting to hear about your family and how that kind of influenced you.
Well, the detail comes very, very specifically from Richard Scarry
Oh
and
yeah.
Best Word Book Ever. And I'm always a little bit cowed when people say, are asked, what was your favorite book as a child? And
Oh right.
it was the platitudes of Thucydides, and mine's best word book ever. And that was the book where I learned that the little black squiggles next to objects actually were
Mm.
words, the words of that thing. So hydrant, and that little red pluggy thing there. Oh, that's a hydrant.
Mm.
But also, that book is so full of details that you can spend 15 minutes looking at each illustration and constantly find something new. And so to me, that has sort of boiled over into my illustration work where I want to try to make a 15-minute illustration, not a 5-second illustration, where it says, and the dog stood on his hind legs, and there you have a dog standing on its hind legs. You've
Mm.
seen absolutely everything there is to gain out of that image in that first glance. To me, it's much more exciting to, when reading a book actually as a parent, that for the 15th or 16th time, to say, oh, look at that little thing down there. I never noticed that before. And it makes a more rich experience for you as the reader, but also as a parent, it makes, reading that story multiple times much more interesting. And then that telescopes into the kid in that, yes, reading this book again and again is actually a good thing, not an eye rolling, oh, can you find something else to read kind of
Mm.
experience. And I think I'm going a little astray here, but I think that there's kind of a blackmail effect that happens where kids sort of start to equate parental love with reading. And that helps to cement a lifelong reader, which is that you start to have you have these memories of being with your parent in a kind of an uncritical space. And it's unrushed time. You're not trying to get to soccer practice. You're not trying to get ready for dinner. It's just you, the parent, and the book. And so for me, that also is one of the real sort of roots of my wanting to be an author someday. I think when you're a kid, it's a natural thing if you experience magic to wonder at some point or other, could I create magic?
Yes.
And that's I I think for me one of the most important things is curiosity. If a kid isn't curious about something, you're not going to get them to be interested in it. Whereas if a kid is naturally curious about something, you can barely pry them away. They'll spend 8 hours doing something that we as adults consider frivolous, but that kid's doing science. And figuring stuff out, figuring out what the world is like. And I think that curiosity is really essential for creativity. If you're not a
Wow.
curious person, you're going to be creating dry, flat stuff.
Exactly. Oh, yes, exactly. I think that is so important for, like you said, for kids to attach to something and really want to do it versus
Yeah.
just, that's they're driven to in that point. And I think that's absolutely, imperative to what I see in your work. And is your new book, Catnap, is available, and wanted to talk about the creative side to this very cool special book that you've got. So could you tell us a little bit about the latest book?
Yeah, so Catnap is kind of a departure for me from anything I've ever done before, because my traditional illustrations that I do are acrylics on Strathmore paper. And this book does have sort of a beginning and end. So in some ways, it's a Wizard of Oz home adventure home story. Except I decided that I wanted to do something that was completely different for me. And it kind of came out of my time in art school at the Boston School of the Museum of Fine Arts, where I was really working hard to develop just my basic drawing and painting skills. And there was a course that they had on Renaissance art. And it was about doing gold leaf, and it was tempera, mixing your own tempera paints with egg yolks and things like that. All these, incredible techniques. And I was dying to take the class, but at that point I'd already been through undergrad at Brown University, and I was kind of like, let's get this going. Let's learn how to draw. So I didn't let myself take that class. Well, Catnap, for me, is self-teaching that class, because it's a story about a kitten who's asleep on the back of a sofa. He's awakened by a mouse, and the mouse jumps into the frame of a poster for the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City that's hanging just above the sofa. And in sort of a call and response that goes on throughout the book, does kitten follow? Of course he does. And as soon as he's gone through the poster into sort of the world of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, he is now engaging with 9 pieces of art that I chose that are real pieces of art at the Met. Except, people have done engagement with art stories before, where a character, goes into a painting, through the looking glass, Alice goes into the mirror. But as far as I know, nobody has actually created those pieces of art in the original materials before. Ooh, and to me, that was really the exciting thing. Kitten gets into an Egyptian carving. So what I did was I poured a 60-pound block of hydrocal plaster, and I carved a replica of this piece at the Met, using a chisel and dental tools that my dentist donated to me. From there, he chases the mouse. They create chaos. And that was one of the fun things. Egyptian panels very often are incredibly orderly, with everything arrayed in a certain way. And as Kitten barrels through this, all of these reeds and amphorae and things go tumbling. And the mouse leaps off the edge of the piece and lands in an illuminated manuscript. So now we switch materials, and the illuminated manuscript is done on a piece of goatskin parchment that I sourced from India. And it was so much fun doing all these different media. So I did carved wood. I made myself a big block of wood and carved a replica of an African mask and my kitten, both out of wood. I did stained glass. I did fired ceramics, Sumia ink painting. So this wide variety of things. Some of those things are things that I knew about, I knew how to do. I'd done stained glass when I was in high school, but others of these things were things that I had to learn, like gold leaf work. And so it was so intellectually interesting, just the curiosity. How do I do this? And to me, that is kind of one of the basis of any kind of creativity, is sometimes flying out at the edge of your experience and figuring out how this is going to happen.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm curious about, did you, get the image you wanted the first take, or was it just like experimenting and like trial and finally got to where you wanted it? Or were some just like, there it was, that was cool. I wanted to know.
I mean, I was very, very lucky because it was much more along the lines of there it is,
Nice.
hooray. I mean, I had mistakes. I mean, I had to learn how to do fired glass painting.
Mm.
And so I found myself I sourced a small craft kiln off of Facebook Marketplace. And I had a really sketchy meetup off of the Massachusetts Turnpike
Oh
with
no.
the seller in the parking lot of an abandoned Friendly's restaurant. But I had to learn how to paint and to fire the glass without over melting the glass so it would slump, or under melting it so that the paint wouldn't fuse. And I had a couple of mistakes with that where I didn't leave it in the kiln long enough before I took it out, and simply the temperature change with my fingers in the glass shattered it. Which is
Mm.
a little frustrating after you spent 3 hours painting a single
Right.
6-inch piece of glass. But it's a learning experience, and so you go back and you do it again, and with luck you're doing it better because now you've had more practice with it. And my thing when I'm in schools, my mantra with kids is practice makes better,
Right.
not perfect. Because, perfect is something we're never going to achieve. So why have your goal be something that you can never achieve? Yeah, to me, as long as something is a little better than it was before, that is success.
Absolutely. I think that is just exactly what everybody who creates, and that's pretty much everybody, is to remember that. We have such a hard time with that final thing has to be perfect, and little
Yeah.
kids, it seems like they can play and enjoy it, and are happy with just having done the piece.
Hmm.
The older you get and you see adults, they just don't want to put that pencil down and start. And I think we need to maybe just embrace the experiment, the science of
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. I mean, the process is really everything.
Yeah.
A lot of times young people getting into the writing and illustrating world are told by elders that, doing the work is more important than being published.
Mm,
And that's really, really hard to take on when your goal is to be published.
right.
And, but I think if you can really focus on the process and, sometimes be surprised by the outcome, it is a much more satisfying experience ultimately, because the second you start off with the mindset of it's got to be like this and everything south of that is failure, then you're probably going to be disappointed because things, unless you are a genius, and I'm not, things generally don't turn out exactly the way you envision them at first. And so, for me, Catnap was the most fun that I've had doing art since high school. And I think part of that was the absence of the preconceptions of what things had to look like in the end. And it really was a day-to-day discovery voyage. And I think that made it really exciting. I mean, it was 7 days a week for, I think, over 6 months. I know that last summer I had 4 days off the entire time. And so I really owed my wife some spousal points on that. But, because I just wasn't available. I was up at 4:30 when the sun came up at the drawing table or down in my basement by 5 or 5:30, and would work through till about 5:30 in the afternoon. And it was so deeply engaging. What's happening with this little piece, learning how to make molds with 2-part silicone and then casting things out of these molds. There were just so many cool little processes to learn that it kept me engaged all through those long hours.
Wow. So is this process, or the new process of going through all of these different materials, is it more satisfying, or just a different kind of satisfaction than just, let's say, just just painting illustrative work straight through?
Well, I think the big difference was the variation. If I'm doing a standard picture book, 32 or 40 pages, I'm essentially sitting down every morning and painting the whole day long. So there really aren't any breaks, and it's very sedentary. And I may love the pieces I'm working on. I may be very, very interested in them, but just the absence of variation. If I'm doing, if you're doing a classroom scene and you have to paint the same 14 desks over and over and over again, to me, there's something a little bit deadening in that. And so for me, the Catnap experience, I was literally working sometimes on 3 and 4 pieces at the same time. So I would do one process for something, and while it was setting up or curing, I'd go off and work on a little bit of another piece. My wife and I called it crab walking, because in some ways it felt like I was simply going sideways on all these different pieces. In the end, I think it was something like 56 different pieces of art for this book.
Wow.
And, the variation just kept it fresh, because every day it might be a different material, different part of a process. And it was cool to have these little bits work out. And then all of a sudden it felt like they're sort of swooped together, and the overall piece was finished. So I might not just be doing a painting of a strange little girl from 1805, but I was also creating the gold frame for it and casting little laurel leaf decorations to work at the edge of the mold, little egg and dart moldings and things like that. So very, very absorbing work. And I don't think I'll do it again. I know some people...
You don't think?
I don't think so, no.
Wow.
Some people have said, well, okay, so you did a book about a kitten going into the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Are you thinking about having him go into another museum? And I don't think so. I've done it. And, that was the thing, is that what I wanted was to see if I could do it. As a sort of a side story, during the pandemic, our next door neighbors, who were part of our pandemic bubble, taught us this really fun game if you have a whole bunch of friends or family around. And the game is basically, what does my t-shirt say? And everybody gets to tell you what your motto would be on your t-shirt. So my wife's t-shirt, my daughter and I both agreed was, "Are you sure?" Which is, do you want any more of this? No, I'm good, thanks. Are you sure? No, I'm good. Really? There are 2 pieces left, and my daughter and my wife agreed that mine was, I wonder if I could make that.
Oh, yeah.
And because that is something that is true for me. We go to a restaurant and have a really great meal. My thought is not so much, I can't wait to get back here again, but it's, I wonder if I can make this dish at home. And, and so for me, trying to make things, I've always been what now is called a maker. And, to me, it's almost the discovery of what it's like to do it the first time. Can I fix the car brakes? Great. I've done that. I don't want to do it again.
I can see that. Yes. It's like, okay, good. It's that's exploration, that curiosity that kids have, they want to try it, and they might not ever come back to it, but they're trying it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a way, in some ways, of our testing ourselves. This book, Catnap, was very much a self-dare, because I honestly didn't know if I could make the pieces of art in a way that I felt convinced. And I think it's great for us to dare ourselves and challenge ourselves. I think life would be so boring without that kind of self-dare.
True, very true. And to explore all of those materials and styles of art, do you have thoughts and to do a book in a different style completely, or just, go to what's tried and true for yourself?
No, I definitely want to expand what I do. To me, the most boring thing would be to kind of find something that works beautifully and just simply do it for the rest of one's career. I think it's always more exciting to try to stretch a little bit. Yeah. And I think some of these techniques I may do just for myself. The wood carving was surprisingly satisfying. And I can't see doing an entire book
my goodness.
in carved wood, because that would take forever. and I'm not sure I like it that much. But it's a new thing to kind of play with a little bit. I definitely want to go back and do some more stained glass, but very much more in a fine art sort of vein.
Oh, right.
Now that I've tried doing the painting with the vitreous paints. But I think what it's done is it's just added more tools to the toolbox.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably made me a little more brave. Because I consider myself kind of a creative chicken in some ways. And I dug this up this morning because there was a phrase that I've thought about for years and years and years since we had to read a book called Tonio Kroger by Thomas Mann when I was taking German in high school. And there was a phrase there that I felt back then completely summed me up. And I still think it does, even more seeing it again this morning. And somebody is described as a burger. Now, it's obviously not a hamburger. It's sort of like a boring city person who has strayed into art, a bohemian homesick for the tidy house of his childhood, an artist with a guilty conscience. I stand between two worlds. I am at home in neither. And that's kind of been really kind of the track of my creative life, because as a kid, I loved making art. I loved making things. But again, as I'd said earlier, I knew I was never going to be able to be good enough to do this professionally. And so when I went to college, I actually was planning on becoming a clinical psychologist working with kids. And at that point, I thought, maybe if I'm working with kids as a psychologist, maybe I could actually write some kind of a helpful book for kids. And, of course, that's death to me at this point. The second you start writing from theme, you're limiting yourself. But to me, that was kind of like a creative way of listening to people and hearing stories and helping people. And while I was at Brown, there were all kinds of kids who didn't seem any brighter than I was, who were simply daring to do these amazing things. So they were actually getting books published while they were in college. They were getting plays staged off Broadway. Wow. And for me, that was kind of a moment of, wait a second, have I had my bar way too low here? Because if you'd asked me what's my dream job, it would have been to be author and illustrator. But I knew I was never going to be good enough. And then I hit on illustration, but editorial illustration, newspaper and magazine. And I was thinking that there's an opportunity to get published every day. If you're lucky, you're on staff somewhere as a political cartoonist. And so you're being creative and you're using, the thinking to do something useful. And you're getting paid for it. So there's none of this starving artist in a garret thing going on. And my one major mistake was, and this is because it was before the internet, there were only 100 paid positions as political cartoonists in the United States. Oh. And you basically had to wait for somebody to die or retire for a spot to open up. And so I picked up 140 rejections from newspapers around the country. While all my friends who were computer scientists were going off to work at little places like this little company up in the Pacific Northwest called Microsoft, I think it is. I was getting rejection letters, usually 5 to 7 a day. Oh, man. People saying, we like your ideas, but your drawing stinks. And so I thought to myself at that point, either I can go back and finish up a psych degree, or I can learn to draw. And I'm very glad that I took that sort of critical leap, because I said, okay, well, let's, they didn't say no, never. Right. They said they like your ideas. And to me, that seemed like it was maybe the harder part. So I put myself through art school. I went to the School of the Museum of Arts and Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and started doing op-ed pieces for the Christian Science Monitor, which is located very close to the school, the Boston Globe, and then suddenly a whole bunch of other clients. And I suddenly got to this point of saying, well, I always said I could never do children's books because I'm never going to be good enough to get published. but I'm actually getting this op-ed stuff published every week. So what about the children's books? And so that's when I thought, okay, let's give this a try. Let's dare a little bit more here. And again, I'm really, really glad I took that leap, because it felt really perilous. I grew up, in that the comfortable world, the tidy house of my childhood from the Thomas Mann story, and how do you dare to risk everything, doing something so unsteady as creativity, as writing and illustrating. But through hard work and a bunch of strokes of luck, I ended up getting my first book to illustrate, and from there it was just a long, slow process of learning new skills.
I think you're really touching on what so many of us, fear, is that risking something to get somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible? And like you said, it does take hard work, and
Yeah.
that you can make it happen. I think so many people feel like, well, I'm just not given that gift or talent of something, and it takes more than that. Little bit of, I think for me, the talent and the fate of it all is just the interest, the creativity and interest in that thing,
Mm-hmm.
and people will continue to explore it, and then they get better at it, and then it grows and grows. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's exactly what you're emphasizing here, is that it takes interest and work, and
Yeah.
belief that it'll grow, it'll go somewhere. We all start with the alphabet, and we can speak and we can write. It just takes time and effort.
Yeah. And I get very uncomfortable around the word talent,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that a lot of people, being creative is kind of sold to the general public as this shamanistic, inborn thing. And, we've probably all met people in the arts who have said, well, you have to be born with the soul of an artist. And my BS meter just rockets when I hear that, because, it's, for me, it really has been much more of a plodding process. And it's
Yes.
just because it interests me. One of my other favorite quotations is from a book that I go back and I read about once a decade, which is Thornton Wilder's Theophilus North. And there's a phrase in it where somebody says, the basis of education of the very young is the expansion of the sense of wonder. And that goes back to curiosity again, but to have the ability to wonder about stuff, the childlike quality of, that's so cool. How do you do that? And I think that's when you talk about talent. I think opportunity is one of the big things. Just having an art teacher when you're a kid who doesn't make everybody paint or draw the exact same way.
Yes.
Having supportive parents. We've all heard stories about people who are inspired by one person saying one thing that changed their life, because suddenly they thought, wow, maybe me. I never thought me, but what about me? And I think one of the other important things is not having people who say no in your life. And, we've all had that crushing experience, I think, as a kid, where you do something on paper in class that you're really excited about, you're really jazzed about. And the person next to you looks over at it and says, that's ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And instantly, somehow, we give away all of our authority. We say, yeah, it's ugly. I'm bad at art.
Mm-hmm.
And creativity, I think, is a very fragile thing. You have to nurture it. You have to care for it. As I said before, I have a very large fraud complex. And it's been very, very hard for me over the years to kind of stifle that as much as possible and say, okay, yeah, I'm not good enough to do this, but let's see.
Right.
and leave that door open. There's the old cliche, you can't triumph if you don't try. And, I think for me, I've been very, very lucky in that I had the right kind of soup to grow up in. Supportive parents, creative parents, interested parents. We had a dictionary by the dining room table. And whenever somebody mentioned something about a word, one of my parents would say, "I wonder where that word comes from," and they'd pull out the dictionary, and we'd actually go over the etymology.
I
And
love that.
so that kind of curiosity. I know some people would consider that really, really anal retentive, but for me, what it said was you're allowed to think about kind of wonky things. You're
And
allowed,
dig into it. Yeah.
exactly why, not just this thing is here, but why is it here? What does it do? Who made it? Why did somebody, come up with this device? All these little questions to me make the world much more exciting than just going, oh, look, there's paper crushed on the road. Like, how did it get there? Who dropped it? Is there a story behind that?
Yeah, the science and creativity I feel like is very, very similar.
Hmm.
The exploration, how and why, and can I reproduce this thing, and just the exploration. And I think so many times, like you said, you get into like some moment where somebody says something's not good or not right when it's just a different style or a different technique.
Hmm.
The grade was for this one thing, and you kind of deviated into some other direction. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it's not exactly what that assignment was for, but it doesn't mean it's
Exactly.
wrong, and you can use that and go somewhere else. And I think it's just so amazing to think of it that way.
Yeah, I mean it's the wrong key for the lock, but it's still a
Yes.
key, and the lock is
Yes.
somewhere else, and you just have to find that. So,
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it reminds
yeah,
me of Alice in Wonderland again, like going in through the the looking glass, or all of the different abstract things that you can pair together and it becomes something new.
yeah,
And in technology and innovation, it's just all of that builds together to be something amazing. And
yeah.
having that, the etymology, looking up as a kid, would you, when you were a kid, would you have gone off and like just imagine something about that situation, that conversation, those words? And what would you, I was curious to know, like, what would you actually be creating? Were you just sketching and drawing? What were you drawing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was very much kind of a typical kid. I was lucky because I had a creative older sister too.
Mm.
And so she's really my first inspiration because she always wanted to be a writer.
Mm.
And so as you ask a group of school kids, raise your hand if you have an older brother or sister. Now raise that hand a little higher if you don't want them always to be better than you at everything. And my sister at 18 months older was going to be developmentally better than me at pretty much everything. But we had a childhood pre-computer, pre-iPhone, and so on rainy Sundays, we weren't going off to soccer league, something like that. We were left to make up our own fun. So we would write puppet plays together. We would hand sew marionettes. I still have one of them. We would write the kind of story where you start writing and then you fold over everything, but the last line, you hand it over to the other person. They have only that line to go on to continue the story. So they write a paragraph, fold over everything but their last line, hand it back to you. And then when you run out of paper, you unfold the whole thing and you read this really weird and disjointed story. But again, that kind of stuff was normalizing creativity
Yeah.
and just sort of making it something that we did. The same way there are people who naturally on a Sunday are going to sit down and watch the football game because it's what you've always done. For us, it was kind of making stuff up or reading.
I can relate to that, and you're right. I think that does make a difference in how you think and how you develop, and how you process the world and what you want to do with it. And
Yeah.
That's definitely true for so many people who are talented or creative or gifted. It's not that.
Yeah,
It's they had that opportunity to explore.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that's exactly what makes the difference, and keeps people in that trajectory of where they're going to take their art or their
yeah.
creativity or their any passion.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
beautiful.
one of the saddest things to me is when I'm doing writing workshops with kids and I encounter kids who clearly have not had a background that permitted creativity.
Mm,
And they'll often put their heads down literally on the desk and not participate in the writing.
mm.
And I'll go over and say, have you come up with an idea? And they'll shrug and put their heads back down again. And it doesn't have to be the best story in the world. It's just about getting something on paper.
Something.
And they'll shrug and they'll flatly refuse to be involved in a creative thing. And to me, that's so sad, because what that means is that, to me, that for them, creativity has been a bad spot for them. It's been where people have told them they're wrong, they're dumb, they're never going to be good at something.
Hmm.
So it seems so symptomatic of a larger refusal to engage with curiosity. And again, I'm tremendously lucky in that I did come from a very curious background.
I think, yeah, exactly. And having those moments where you see that, oh yeah, the gratitude of I was given this opportunity to make mistakes and to try things and explore.
Yeah.
And when I think about mistakes and things, I'm wondering, as you and your sister were growing up, did you get to that point where, like, okay, we created a little too far and we might have gotten ourselves into some kind of any trouble or situations like I wasn't sure if that happened to you guys at all, but
Yeah, no, I mean the only I would say it's more curiosity trouble than creative trouble. My best friend and I were into things like stop motion animation, and we'd build forts in the woods and things like that. It really had kind of one of the last free range childhoods.
mm,
But we were also very curious. He is a scientist now,
wow.
genetic scientist, and we were very interested in pyrotechnics at one point. And so we definitely I never got into trouble with the law. I think now, post 9/11, it could have been, I mean, honestly, a very different situation. But
Of course.
we were building acetylene cannons and learning how to do model rocket engines. Can be misused in a lot of different ways. Um, so I mean, the thing is that we were not we were not delinquents. We were definitely very curious about the science of small explosions.
Well, there was a time where they would sell, chemistry kits for kids that were, very, very true to life. It just was what they had.
Yeah, you could make some bad things with those, or the science kit that had actual uranium
Right.
in it. You're like, a different era. I mean, I grew up in the era of lawn darts,
Oh,
so
yes.
much fun, much danger. So there was that. It was that kind of trouble, really.
Yeah.
Not, never got taken in by the law
Right.
and dragged home by the ear by a policeman.
Right. And so one of the questions I have that I was thinking to talk to you about was, what would you be doing if you didn't create? And as we're talking, I don't think that is worded right, correctly, because I think maybe we kind of always are creating. Your mind seems to be always, imagining how could I, what could I do? How could
Yeah.
I do that? So if you're not creating a picture book or you're not, working on art, what do you like to do?
The funny thing is that a few years ago, I realized that all of my hobbies are about creative transformation.
Right.
So I'm a vegetable gardener.
Uh-huh.
So, taking this bad plot of sandy soil, turning it into beautiful, rich soil, and then taking seeds and putting them out and transforming that into food. There's something really creative and magical about that. And, the gardening is nice because it needs you, but it doesn't need you at the same point. In some ways, it's an observational creativity of, oh, look how well this is doing. Or, oh, we got those tomato hornworms, got to get rid of those. One of my other hobbies is I love cooking. Cooking is transformation. It's taking ingredients and turning them into something better than each of the individual ingredients, or so you hope. My one attempt at making Scotch eggs didn't turn out very well. And my wife came into the house after work and said, "Oh my God, what's that awful smell?" And so that was about 4 hours wasted. And then I also love building things, woodworking. And that's taking wood and turning it into a useful piece of furniture or something like that. So I would have to say that I would, if I were not doing books, it probably would be something that was creative. But if it wasn't something creative, I think I probably still really would have enjoyed being a psychologist.
Right.
Just sort of, because again, it's that curiosity. Why are you feeling that way? What happened to you when you were younger that caused this sort of series of actions or mindsets that has led you to this place of being stuck right now? Although I think in some ways what I know about children and trauma now, I think I'm not sure my heart would have been able to take all of the hardship that I would have been exposed to. But still, from an intellectual point of view, I think it's fascinating
Absolutely.
to think about how we work and why we work the way we do. And, can you just, tug at this little thread and untie the knot and suddenly be free? And, I do believe that's possible.
There's that satisfaction. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the idea, I think, is basically to be the agent of betterment for other people. In that way.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that satisfaction of like getting some solution or answer and realization. And to me, I just keep coming back to that science influence and the freedom to be curious and explore things. And when you're working on all so long and all day long. I can imagine, becomes possibly tedious, tiring, a struggle. And, this is the job also, but to get through some of that, how do you kind of keep things light and get through it?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like a jumping jacks break.
Oh,
just go out into the hallway where the floor is the sturdiest and do 100 jumping jacks. I listen to radio, and recently, I think 2 books ago, I discovered streaming BBC 4 radio.
Oh.
And it's wonderful because I'm listening to a different country's troubles.
Oh,
so
they
don't bother me as much. And BBC 4 has these amazing radio plays and kind of what you'd consider old style radio dramas. And so that can keep me going, just, my one part of my head going while I'm doing thousands of brushstrokes to paint the hair on the back of a bunny or something like that.
Right. Yes, to keep it going.
Exactly. Or I'll also play music that sort of fits the mood. I mean, if I'm having a lull at 2:33 in the afternoon, some really good loud rock helps to get you back in again. And again, sometimes what I've learned is you simply stop working on the piece you're doing and go on to another one. So I may have been working on a painting for 4 or 5 days. And I'm getting kind of tired of some of the details I'm having to paint. Well, so what I'll do is I'll stop, pick the next piece I'm going to work on, transfer the drawing to the paper I'm going to be painting on, and maybe even paint sort of the underpainting that I do, so that as soon as I finish the one piece, I'm leaping right into the next one. And you don't have that kind of gasp of, oh, I'm done, now what?
Right, then you just start all over from scratch. You kind of can just jump off it. Oh, that's a good idea, yeah, exactly.
And I think everybody has to learn their own set of tools for continuing. The mortgage can be a pretty powerful tool to keep you sitting in the chair. It's you don't have the luxury of not doing it. So on the worst moments, that's the thing that keeps you going.
Right.
And again, what I like about both writing and illustrating my stories is that I am choosing a story that is truly from me to the core. And it's just simply telling the story in words and pictures versus illustrating somebody else's story, which I really love for the problem solving aspect of it, the intellectual aspect of how do we show this the best we can. But ultimately, a story that somebody else wrote came from somebody else. So it
Right.
doesn't quite fit me as much as something that I write myself. Um, but I like doing both, and again, illustrating other people's stuff is neat for the intellectual aspect of it, and trying to dive into somebody else's thoughts.
Oh, right. Yeah. Like, how would they think, what do they mean by this? How could I
Hmm.
interpret it? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and how can it be the most effective images to support the words that you can come up with?
And so I think the question I would like to ask to finish this off is, what creative advice would you give your past self? I think that's quite fitting for this conversation.
I think because I've had such a long experience of sort of that, the artist with a guilty conscience and the fraud complex. I think I probably would just look into my eyes and very, very quietly say, "You can do this," because the doubts along the way have been have been many, and I don't feel like an especially brave person, but I'm also, I guess, kind of stubborn to have carried forward through this for such a long time, and said, okay, well, in this book I hit this mark and this mark and this mark, but it's not quite enough yet. There's a George Bernard Shaw quotation that I found in a newspaper probably 30 years ago that I have in my desk drawer. And it says, and my wife doesn't like it because she thinks it's very dire, but it says, as long as I have a want, I have a reason for living. Satisfaction is death.
Ooh.
And the thing is that if you are entirely satisfied with something, if you've finished a project and you say 100%, yep, I nailed it. That's everything I've ever wanted to do. What's left for you to go on to the next?
Right,
You know,
right.
I think it's important for us to give ourselves credit when we've done something the way we wanted it to turn out. But I think a part of you still has to be a little bit cynical or a little bit critical and go, yeah, this part was really good and it's the best I could do for right there. But I wonder if I could do this better. And that's the sort of the key to go on to the next story.
And to keep that curiosity alive and
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
continued wonder.
Yeah.
I think that just keeps, to the next project, to the next thing you're seeing, to the, and like you said, the project might be done in that one project, but it could be how, a different idea for later. And I think
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
excellent advice. I think so many of us, I mean, probably all of us have that doubt, can I
Hmm.
do this? Is it worth, if I'm
Yep.
going to fail, it's okay. Like just try
Yeah.
again, it's like science. You
Exactly.
just try it again.
And that really is sort of like my base message in school visits is you can do this. You
Wonderful.
have it within you to do this if, and then the if is followed by hard work and persistence and finding mentors and YouTube University and,
Mm.
all the ways that you're going to have to learn the how that you're going to
Hmm.
do it. But I really am, I believe firmly that pretty much everybody, unless they have gotten no all their life, can do really cool stuff, and I think it's important for us to try.
Yes. Wonderful. Do you have any final thought that you'd like to share with the listeners?
No, again, thank you so much for having me on. I think that my big thing, the thing really is you can do it.
Yes.
And, I meet lots of adults who say, oh, I can't even draw a stick figure. And, I can't draw a straight line. You're like, I can't draw a straight line without a ruler. What are you talking about? If I have to draw a perfect circle, I use a template. And there's
Right.
nothing wrong with that. And, I meet a lot of adults who say, oh, I wish I had kept on drawing. And my response is go back and start. But you have to remember you are going to start where the fifth grade you quit. You can't skip all of the hard work of the brain development of making making your brain do what you want it to do. That development comes through practice, and but I always encourage those adults do it. And there's
Yeah.
also a wonderful book by a woman named Betty Edwards called "Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain." And for anybody who's listening to me say, I can't draw a stick figure, and feels the same way, check this book out because she's got these really great exercises that get us around our adult doubts. And you end up doing this little sketch or drawing or piece of art, and say like, "Whoa, wait a second, I did that." And to
Huh.
me, that's just such a wonderful thing, especially in adulthood,
Right.
to have all those years of negativity and doubt cast aside with this one simple little exercise.
Oh,
But
that's
again,
great. Yeah.
you can do it.
I will put that book, the link to that book in the show notes because I think that'd be great for people to find and look at it. Especially as adults,
Yeah,
where we want to try something and feel that satisfaction and that dopamine reward of I can do it, I can do it again. What can I do with it? So, oh my
yeah,
gosh,
yeah.
wonderful! Thank you, for coming on and sharing your ideas and all about Catnap. Our audience would love to know where to find you online. If you could share with us your website, and that would be great.
Yeah, my website's pretty simple. It's Brian at brianlees.com. And that I should also say my last name is pronounced Lees, not Lies. It's spelled like lies, but it came from Luxembourg.
Oh.
And if you look at videos online of people reading my books, they always get it wrong. Uh, but it's Brian at brianlees.com. I am also on Instagram, and I'm still calling it Twitter. And Bluesky and Threads, and most of the time it's just my name, Brian Lees.
Great.
But we can, if you go to my website, you can see all my other handles as well.
Again, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I love just hearing all about different ways people think and your way of that scientific process of like, how can I do this? And that I can, is just amazing. And I'm sure our listeners will enjoy this. So again, I wanted to thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Wonderful. And I want to thank our listeners again for listening and joining us. If you enjoyed this podcast and found it valuable, please share it with others so we can reach people who might like a bit of inspiration on their own creative journey. I'm Becky Gehrisch, and until next time, happy creating.
Hey there, creative minds! Are you ready for the next burst of inspiration? Make sure to subscribe to the Origins of Creativity podcast in your favorite podcast app for all our latest episodes. Visit booklingmedia.com/podcast for show details, links to connect with us, and so much more. This has been the Origins of Creativity podcast, where inspiration meets imagination.